All right, folks. Now our attention turns to obviously much darker subject matter, but this broke here. Thousands of Palestinians flee amid heavy Israeli attack on Gaza City, which, once again, Gaza City in the evacuated and supposedly cleared out northern region of the Strip. Civil emergency service says dozens killed in strikes launched after Israeli military issued evacuation orders. People in Gaza City have reported one of the heaviest attacks by Israeli forces since October 7th, sending thousands of Palestinians fleeing from an area already ravaged in the early weeks of the 9-month-old war. The latest Israeli incursion into the eastern sector of Gaza City came as Israel's far-right coalition parties threatened again to stop ongoing negotiations in Qatar for a ceasefire, arguing that halting the fighting now would be a huge mistake. Sporadic militant activity has hindered Israeli efforts to maintain control in Gaza. Despite claiming authority over the Gaza City area months ago, Israel has had to contend with persistent pockets of resistance, forcing a reevaluation of its military strategy and redeployment of forces. Before the recent offensive, the Israeli military said it had issued evacuation orders in the targeted zone. The territory's civil emergency service told Reuters it believed that dozens of people had been killed in Gaza City, but that teams were unable to reach them because of offensives in a number of areas. Local sources said Israeli warplanes had bombed a residential apartment near an industrial junction south of Gaza City, killing 2 citizens and wounding 5 others. They said a house south of Gaza City was bombed, killing 1 person and wounding 7 others. Quote, eyewitnesses said that thousands of citizens were displaced from areas southwest of the city towards the northwest and spent the night on the streets without shelter, a source said. Sayeda Abdel Baki, who was sheltering at her relative's home in the Daraj neighborhood of Gaza City, told the Associated Press, "We fled in the darkness amid heavy strikes. This is my 5th displacement." Don't forget, these people have been just ordered around now for 9 months with bombs raining on their heads. Medics at Al-Ahli Arab Baptist Hospital in Gaza City had to evacuate patients to the already crowded and under-equipped Indonesian hospital in the northern Gaza Strip, Palestinian health officials said. The article goes on later. Hopes among Gaza residents of a pause in the fighting had revived after Hamas accepted a key part of a U.S. ceasefire proposal, prompting an official in the Israeli negotiating team to say there was a real chance of a deal. However, the Israeli finance minister, Bezalel Smotrich, who heads a pro-settler party that is part of Benjamin Netanyahu's governing coalition, said stopping the war now would be a huge mistake. On Sunday, Netanyahu's office issued a document saying any deal must allow Israel to resume its offensive until it reaches its war goals. The document was heavily criticized by the opposition leader, Yair Lapid, who said, "What good does this do? We are at a crucial moment in the negotiations. The lives of the hostages depend on this. Why make such taunting announcements? How does this help the process?" Yeah, so, there's a little bit of palace intrigue there. At this point, how can you even give a fuck about any of that? How can you even follow that with any degree of seriousness? I mean, Netanyahu has this quote-unquote right-wing faction on his back. Well, he seems to capitulate to them before, it's even a point of argument. Look at this. Look at this. And when I say look at this, we're going to show you a report that Al Jazeera put out. This is a video. This is upsetting. There is no graphic violence here, so if that's a concern for you, there's none of that in here. But this is really difficult to take on a psychological, mental, and emotional level.
زوجي مقطوره رجله وضل مكانه محاصر في الشجاير ولن نتهاون ولن نقل ولن نساوم حتى اخر ذره تراب في ارض فلسطين، حتى لو قصفوا بيوتنا ودمروا بلادنا، احنا لو على ذره تراب شوف حالي فيها عرس فيها تيران، فيش ميه، فيش اكل، فيش شرب، احنا صامدين بإذن الله عز وجل. عشان ياكل، عشان ولا حدا من العالم بتطلع فينا. روحت من شغلي، عشان روحت من شغلي لا لقيت امي ولا لقيت ابني ولا لقيت حدا ولا اخو ولا اي حدا الي هالقد.
أخطر ما يمكن أن نتحدث فيه الآن انهيار المنظومة الصحية. كان هذا القسم بالأمس عصرا يعج بالإصابات، ممتلئ بالإصابات.
So you saw there, in case any of you guys missed the titles, or if you're listening, they mentioned the official death count in the high 30,000s range, but said that obviously, and it ought to go without saying at this point, I mean, those figures we're talking about January, February, right, 30,000 plus. It's obviously much higher than that, partly because the hospital systems have been destroyed, and just a lot of the infrastructure period has been destroyed. So how can you keep an accurate count past a certain point? It is past that point. We're going to do a segment on the Lancet's paper next, but without getting into the specifics of that, now we're talking about back in the north. We're talking about back in the north, and you saw those people in that video I mean, it's just unspeakable. I mean, you're talking about people here who have been ordered around for 9 months.
One of the guests we've reached out to is Ilan Pappé, who I really want to speak to. Because if you really delve into the history of the Israeli state, this is not an aberration. This is a fruition of the Zionist ideology. It has always been like this. And it's interesting, the bit about the hostage negotiations. Going all the way back, the advantage that the Zionist project had over the Arabs is, in spite of what they want to tell you now, they were Europeans. They understood European politics. They had connections into European governments that the Palestinian elites and ruling authorities just didn't have those kinds of connections. So as England was preparing to give up the mandate and leave the region, the Zionists were very effective at pulling strings behind the scenes and manipulating the conversation over what a post-British Palestine was going to look like, in a way that the Arab communities just did not have the connections or the sophistication about European realpolitik to be able to match what the Zionists were doing behind the scenes. So, for example, the British offered at one point that they would have a joint governing body, which the Zionists claimed they were for, but only because, as we see now from documents of their internal deliberations, they knew the Arabs were not going to accept the terms of the deal because it was predicated on them giving up land. Why would they give up their homeland to these invaders from Europe? So they knew the Palestinians were going to turn it down. So they claimed to be for it so that they would look like the reasonable ones. And this is a myth that they've sustained throughout.
Well, yeah.
Oh, the Palestinians, they're unreasonable. They just don't want to make peace with anybody. Oh, Jews have always been there. You know how many Jews were in that region prior to the Zionist colonialist project, which they didn't make any secret of it being a colonialist project. That was cool back then. It wasn't
Right.
it wasn't stigmatizing to have colonial brand coffee, right? It was cool to be colonial back then. There were 2% of Jews there before the Zionists came. So the idea that this was a mixed population that couldn't settle on who the land belonged to. Everything you've heard about this through mainstream media and Zionist propaganda, everything you know about this is a lie. What you are seeing right now, this is what Zionism has always been. Israel was born in a similar expulsion, in a similar ethnic cleansing, in a similar genocide. These kibbutzim there, they are built very often on the ruins of Arab villages that are still visible. This has always been the Zionist project, to take all of this land. From the beginning, that was what the Zionists wanted. They never wanted the Palestinians to have the West Bank from the river to the sea. That was always the Zionist project. That was always the vision. And that's why whenever they say, "Oh, it's hopeful, we're gonna come to some peace agreement," they've played this game since before they even had a state. They've played this game with the Western powers. Oh, yes, that's very interesting. Let's negotiate. Meanwhile, they're killing these people.
Yeah,
and they're going to keep killing them and pretending to be open to negotiations.
Yeah, and that's why this ink spilled over the right-wing faction. The Bezalel Smotrich is making it hard to call the fighting off. I mean, that's just nonsense.
Exactly.
That's just nonsense. This is very obvious. It's obvious this is how this was going to go since last fall.
Right.
This was the easiest thing in the world to see coming, and what looked like a push from north to south, which we knew they were going to do, is now starting over again in the north again. Right. Round 2, over and over again. And it's the most horrible thing I've ever seen. I mean, it's the most horrible thing I've ever lived to see on the world stage. And I'm 30 something. Well, I'm 37. I know how old I am. That was a Joe Biden. I'm 30. Whatever. No, the reason I.
Well, anyway.
Yeah. Well, anyway, it's not important. 30. Whatever. No, the reason I said I'm 30 something is because I'm thinking. My mind was a sentence in front of my mouth. I'm thinking. Aaron Mate's father, Gabor Mate, said it's the most horrible thing he's ever seen. And I was going to say he's 80 something or 70 something. I don't know how old he is, but he said.
Yeah, I mean it's hard for me to say. You've had Rwanda. You had recently Yemen.
But I'm talking about
which
seeing
got
in terms of
very little coverage.
What we've been exposed to on this sort of granular level.
Sure.
Yeah.
Sure. Well, that was the thing. Even back then, even when the Rwandan genocide was happening, you heard about it. There wasn't a lot of imagery because who the hell could go in there and film it?
Exactly. You didn't see it up close.